All right, everybody, so welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing, and today we're going to be talking about going from one end of the lake to the other. So, this time of year is very notorious. We're back in t-shirts most of the time, shorts, stuff like that, especially in the middle part of the day. We've still got those cool mornings, but, this is kind of going to really play into effect this time of year going into the pre-spawn, and then it's also going to affect or it's kind of going to go into summer, fall, even winter and stuff. Winter not so much, but mainly the pre-spawn. This is a huge deal. It's one of those times where you go to the lake and you're fishing maybe in an area you're used to. We'll just call it the center of the lake, right in the general middle area of the lake, and nothing's really happening. And you hear about all these guys, especially the tournament guys, really big on it. The fish like the north end of the lake and nothing's really going their way, and then they'll go to the south end of the lake and try to find a different pattern and stuff. But that's what we're kind of going to go over, and what these fish are doing on different ends of the lakes this time of year. So stay tuned. This is something you don't want to miss. All right, everybody, so going into the pre-spawn, and real quick before we jump into everything, if the video helps you at all, make sure to like it. It helps me out a ton. Also subscribe. I got you covered when it comes to anything bass fishing, whether it's seasonal patterns, baits, anything like that, lake breakdown, so on and so forth. And if you ever have any questions or you just want to talk fishing, comment down below. It helps me out a whole lot, and I love hearing from you guys. So we're moving into that pre-spawn pattern, right? So we've got a lot of these fish that are migrating and have migrated to staging areas depending on where you're at in the country. And those staging areas, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that check out the last video that I did that dropped Monday on staging. And I literally just pull up a map. I'm sitting in the house, got a map pulled up, and I'm breaking down secondary points and stuff like that, things you need to look for when you're looking for fish that are staging up to spawn. Jumping into the whole dilemma of fishing the north side or the south side, northern banks, southern banks, eastern banks, west banks, it's kind of like, what's the big deal about all this? Well, typically on your lake, the northern end of your lake is the shallowest on most lakes, okay? Not every one of them, but most lakes, your northern end of your lake is going to be more shallow. You're typically going to have more stained water, and those areas are going to heat up quicker in return. When that water temperature starts heating up, especially if the weather conditions are stable enough, I don't really go by the moon phases and stuff because, I've never it's a full moon, these fish are going to move up and spawn. I've went when there's really no moon out necessarily, maybe a quarter of a moon or something like that, and they're spawning. I don't think the moon plays a huge phase in that particular, personally. I think it's more of the side where weather conditions are stable. There's not this huge drastic changes in temperature. Here in Alabama we have a lot of crazy weather, so one day it may be like 75-80 degrees, and then like last week, like today, it's like 75-76 degrees, and then last week during the day the high was like 18, and there was one day where it was like 7. So a lot of that bipolar weather, I don't think that the fish are going to move up and spawn. I don't care what the moon's doing or what the air or the water temperatures has been. That's just my experience. But either way, your northern banks, your northern side of your lake is typically going to be I'm not going to say your northern banks, but your northern side of the lake is typically going to be shallower. So the very northern point of that lake, it's going to be shallow. It's going to heat up a little bit quicker, so fish can spawn quicker during that time before the south end of the lake. The fish in the southern end decide to spawn because of the deeper water, the water temperature. It just takes a little bit longer for that. It takes a little bit more time for that water temperature to get up where they typically like it. Although spotted bass, we fish a lot of spotted bass fisheries around here, and spotted bass are not as temperamental when it comes to spawning. And then in your blueback herring lakes, those fish are more it's almost an inconvenience for those fish to spawn. They typically don't really care to spawn in a blueback fishery. All they're worried about is eating bluebacks. That's it. I've watched a lot of those fish just move up on a point, on a main lake point, and just drop their eggs and then, you know, go right back out. It's it's crazy. And you know, I don't really understand how spotted bass's population just picks up and picks up and picks up, especially when they're not doing the typical stuff that bass do when they reproduce. But yeah, well, some of them, not all of them, but some of them. But you know, it's a good time if you're used to fishing the south end of your lake and you know you can't really put that pattern together. The fish are in a funk because of the weather. They're not really staging up just yet, you know, on that southern end of your fishery where I'm just speaking metaphorically here, what you may be experiencing right now, to try and help you, you know, when you do decide to go, if something's not going right, to make that adjustment and be confident in making that adjustment, because that's going to be 99% of it's being confident when you're making that adjustment. Confidence in yourself and, you know, the capabilities to break down what's going on that side of the lake. But, you know, maybe your southern water is, you know, 56 degrees and then you're cruising up to the northern end of your side of the lake, and, you know, before you know it, you look down at your graph and you're at 60, 61, 62, 63, whatever the case may be. So, you know, you've seen a drastic water change temp, you know, within 5 to 8 degrees. And it's like, okay, maybe I need to be focusing on those staging areas that, you know, he was talking about, the secondary points, the mouths of the creeks, you know, those little pockets right off the main lake. And that's another thing, if you're fishing the northern side of your lake and you've got a lot of those little pockets right off the, right outside of your main channel where you drive your boat, those are great areas for fish to spawn too, especially if they're protected. If there's some kind of point that comes out, sandbar, anything, it can be any little thing, you know, that's in the way to block wind or anything like that. Now, your southern end of the lake, let's just say, you know, like I said, that they're not necessarily in that staging process where they're staged up and they're ready to feed and ready to make beds and stuff like that. That's typically going to be a time when that migration's happened, and it can be very difficult. And we've been experiencing that a lot here around here. I've talked to a lot of other fishermen, other content creators, and you know, we experience that a lot, and we're seeing that a lot, where those fish are moving. They're just moving. And the cool thing is we can verify that with forward-facing sonar, because I can sit there, it's like I talked about a while back, I sit there on that channel swing and I point my sonar off of that channel swing, and I'm sitting there watching these fish just constantly move. I mean, you'll see them from 100 feet out, and then by the time you blink, or if you look around or something, look back, they're gone. They're already past your boat. They're moving with a purpose, and that's typically what they're doing this time of year. They're looking for those staging areas to get close to their spawn, and they're typically going to be looking for those areas where they can stage up. There's deeper water close by where all they have to do is just move up and down. Now, I've noticed a lot with the staging and stuff, it's better if you have bait around, but it's kind of like you want to have bait around with a lot of fish in that area, because it's like if you have a small population, 5 bass staged up in an area and there's 1,000 shad, they don't really have to compete for that food. You just kind of got to be there at the right time, right place, stuff like that. It's kind of like that summer top water bite. Now let's talk about the pockets. Let's just say whichever side of the lake you're fishing, the southern end or the northern end. We'll go with the southern end first, since we were just talking about the southern end of your lake. Those fish that are cruising up to those pockets that they're typically going to spawn, they're going to be at the mouths of the pockets. They're going to be moving towards the mouths of the pockets, and typically they're going to be in the middle of that channel. But when they're in the middle of that channel, they're going to be suspending. And you know, that's where a lot of those finesse baits and stuff come into play. But that's mainly just for the fish that are going to be suspending or spawning eventually into those pockets. The pockets, like I said, that I typically like to look for is some with a bunch of cover in it, and I'm looking for hard bottom. That's going to be a huge key factor. Hard bottom, because if they're, you know, trying to spawn in mud and stuff, number one, it's just going to, you know, dirty everything up when they go to fan out their bed. Secondly, that real soft bottom any type of rain or any kind of water disturbance, it's going to stir up everything and their eggs are not going to be able to reproduce. Now let's talk about being on that northern end of the lake right now. We're looking for those fish that are going to spawn in the pockets, right? And this is going to apply to that south end when it starts happening, okay? So we're on the north end of the lake and we're going up into pockets, and we're finding fish at the mouths of the pockets. We're finding fish that may be on little secondary points or bluff rocks or something like that sticking out in the pocket. The biggest thing that I see people get caught up on is northern banks. Northern banks, northern banks, northern banks. Heard that my whole life. Fish the northern banks during the pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn. That's where most of your fish are going to be. And I'm not here to argue and say that that's not true. But I do notice there is a lot of people that fish those northern banks. And what happens is that fishing pressure goes up. And when that fishing pressure goes up, it can make fishing very, very difficult. They can get keyed in on a very, very specific bait just because they're not seeing that bait a lot or whatever the case may be. But it typically ends up being pretty tough to fish those northern banks and stuff like that. Now, what I like to do, I like finding southern banks. I like finding the opposite, where I see most people fishing, I try to go the opposite side and mimic that same thing that I'd be doing on that northern bank as I would do on the southern side, okay? And typically what I find out when that happens is I catch a lot more fish. Now, am I catching these trophy-sized bass and stuff like that? Typically, not all the time. It does happen. But it's not all the time. But I'm not tournament fishing. I'm going out there to get content for you guys and try to provide you a way where you can go out on the lake and catch a bunch of fish. Because I did polls on all my social medias and stuff, and 98% of y'all, that's exactly what you want. You want to go out on the lake and have fun, catch a bunch of fish. And some people only have fun, catching real big fish, and doesn't mean that this isn't going to apply to those guys, those tournament guys. So you can kind of think of it like this, maybe you're a tournament fisherman and you're looking for those bigger fish those northern banks and stuff, do your thing. You may have to use a lot more finesse baits and stuff like that. But let's say you're a tournament guy and you're hitting those northern banks and it's so heavily pressured that you can't really figure out nothing with the baits that you're using, or whatever the case may be. You just may not have the experience that the other anglers have at the time, or just something. Your plan's not working. Swap over to them southern banks. 5 fish is better than none. But now if you're going out for fun, I highly suggest that when you start seeing boats, you see a boat right there at the mouth of that creek, you see a boat in every secondary point on that right side of the lake, look over on that left side. There is always fish to be caught on the opposite side. That's one thing that I've noticed over the past 20 years is it's not really like you're never around fish. It's just either they're willing to bite and aggressive, or they're not, or you're just keyed in on something that they really, really want. So, but finding them is going to be a huge part of it. I'm saying we typically know they're going to be on those points, those secondary points, the mouths of creeks, those channel swings, stuff like that. Use every bit of that. But, don't get caught up on fishing just one side of the lake. When one side's not working, go to the other side. I do that a lot on the home lake of mine. I typically always start in the middle of the lake. If I can't get something figured out, then I'm running to the south end. If I can't get something figured out from the south, I'm going north. And typically it pays off big. So either way, guys, if the video helps you at all, make sure to like. It helps me out a whole lot. Subscribe. I got you covered when it comes to anything bass fish. Comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. See you next time.